Which Battlefield game is worth playing right now? Whether you're a battle-hardened veteran of the series or a brand new noob and just want to chill out and experience some large-scale FPS chaotic action, the Battlefield series has you covered. While we are still in the franchise's low point, now that support has completely ended for 2042 and a new entry is yet to be announced, there's still a massive amount of fun to be had with past and present titles in the series, with the added bonus of being able to pick up any game in the series for like $5. So let's take a look at the active games and decide which is worth your time. Let's get started. Picking which Battlefield to play in 2024 is like picking your favorite Spice Girl. You can't really go wrong, but there's definitely a clear winner. For most, it will come down to how active and lively the player base is for each game, and I can only really speak for PC here for each entry. For consoles, your guess is as good as mine. But let's go in chronological order, starting with Battlefield 3. I'll start here because it's probably the oldest of the games that still feels amazing to play to this day and has a relatively decent number of servers still active. Battlefield 3 in many ways revolutionized the series from a technical and presentation standpoint and features some of my favorite multiplayer FPS maps of all time. It completely holds up to this day visually and audially, which I'm pretty sure is a word, and is still one of my favorite shooters of pretty much all time as well. That being said, despite having a small but dedicated player base on PC, they are dedicated. If you jump into a server as a new player all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, don't be surprised when you get absolutely obliterated by enemy jets, tanks, and players. These people, still playing Battlefield 3 for the most part, have been playing it since launch, and I've found, especially with pilots, that it's seemingly, and for all intents and purposes, their life's goal to perfect their skills at this game. But it's still entirely possible to jump in and enjoy one of the most visually impressive games ever made, with grittier and more grounded feeling combat and shooting, and generally just have an amazing time. Battlefield 3 also had a somewhat interesting campaign with really high production values that can be fun to play through maybe once. I recommend picking up Battlefield 3 for cheap just to experience this title if you haven't already. But it's a tough one to commit long term to at this point. Battlefield 4 is one of the most no-brain recommendations when it comes to which Battlefield to play now. It's a stone cold classic, straight up, taking the designs of 3 and enhancing and improving them in so many ways while adding a massive amount of content. While I argue it actually downgraded a couple things from Battlefield 3, namely the grittier atmosphere and map design, it more than makes up for it just by the sheer amount of stuff available and satisfying progression within, all beautifully wrapped around some stellar gameplay. Battlefield 4 has an extremely healthy player base and is considered by many fans of the series as the last real entry. It captured so many elements that made Battlefield so engaging, addictive, and fun, and you really can't go wrong in getting into this game even in 2024. Once again, the audio designs, visuals, and gameplay stand up extremely well. However, some movement mechanics to me are arguably the only things that are beginning to show the age of this more than 10-year-old shooter. Battlefield 4 is also just way more accessible to just jump in and play and enjoy, in my opinion. And while yes, there are people who have been playing since launch that will likely destroy you, there's also so many more players than Battlefield 3 that fill the servers that you're just likely to have a satisfying and fun time regardless of your experience with the title. Battlefield 4 also features a full single-player campaign that is fun? It's kind of dated design-wise, with lots of on-rails moments and some annoying characters, but there are some pretty good set pieces to enjoy, and visually it's still very impressive. Regardless, jump into Battlefield 4, play it right now, and experience some truly epic Battlefield moments. Battlefield Hardline was one I personally missed the boat on and only recently played for the first time a couple years ago, and while I appreciate a lot of what it did, the entire concept of the game still kind of throws me a bit, and aesthetically I just personally don't find it as engaging or pleasing to see as other Battlefield titles. That being said, Hardline honestly had some really cool mechanics and game modes that set it apart from other entries in the series. I think it would be a recommendation from me if it had any kind of active player base at all. The fact that there is really only one server still active in any way on PC, and more often than not that server is empty, makes Battlefield Hardline extremely hard to recommend. It's a shame because playing it right now I wish I had been able to experience this game in its heyday. I'm yet to play Hardline's single player campaign, but apparently it's batshit crazy and not unlike a Fast and Furious movie, so at some point I'll need to check it out because, well, those movies are pure art. Next is Battlefield 1, and anyone who's watched my content before knows this is another no-brainer recommendation from me. With a very active player base, best in industry visuals and audio design to this day, and some of the most atmospheric, intense, and pulse-pounding action in any multiplayer shooter I've ever played, Battlefield 1 is an absolute masterpiece from start to finish. It's also very fun to just jump into even now in 2024 because there really isn't an experience like it in the market. There's a few other World War I games, but they're so much more niche and hardcore, whereas Battlefield 1 for me strikes the the perfect balance between fun arcadey gameplay while still capturing the vibes and horror of World War I battles. The crunching of land ships, the screams of charges, the brutal melee weapons, the satisfying bolt actions. Battlefield 1 is absolutely one of the best games I've ever played, and I'm still shocked at how immersed I get every time I jump into a round. It also features a type of single-player campaign that follows different war stories across the conflict, and each are pretty interesting in their own way, but not exactly why I'm here. The multiplayer is still extremely active and fun, and I highly recommend jumping into the mud of the trenches and just enjoying the polish and care that DICE used to put into their games. Battlefield 5 is a very interesting title, which did a lot of pretty innovative things with its gameplay, and on PC it was recently updated with EA anti-cheat, and in my experience so far, this has helped tremendously in combating hackers, which were honestly the biggest reason I couldn't recommend the game to people before. With the hacking plague somewhat cold, Battlefield 5 remains an extremely solid shooter that still lacks some of the more cohesive aesthetics of past Battlefield games. But what it has going for it more than anything is its incredible gunplay and movement, which to me is probably the best in the series and the most refined and modern feeling. Returning to Battlefield 5 more often than not just reminds me of how much fun the game actually is and how much more I can appreciate what it was trying to do with some of its gameplay innovations. The game has a very active player base on PC, arguably the most active, with multiple servers of different game modes and maps. It features a server browser, of course, something I'll never take for granted again, and as a result feels just as rewarding to jump into now as it did at launch, if not more so. Playing Battlefield now, of course, also gives you the benefits of lots of added content that, while drip-fed extremely slowly during the game's lifecycle, actually presents now a lot of enjoyable maps, weapons, and vehicles to use. With lots of progression mechanics, playstyles, and things to unlock, Battlefield 5 is also an extremely solid experience. For those wanting the most modern and active feeling Battlefield without playing 2042, this should be the one you consider dedicating your time towards. Finally, and lastly, we come to Battlefield 2042. You know, I never thought there'd be a day I would recommend 2042 to anyone, and today is still not that day. Alright, it's not that bad. And although for all intents and purposes I myself have stopped playing it, I would recommend it on a deep discount if you want to see what the latest and not greatest of the franchise has to offer. 2042 isn't a terrible game, it's a complicated title that does some very few and far in between things really well, wrapped entirely around one of the most disappointing and lackluster experiences I've had with the series. While I was as hyped as anyone, and admittedly at launch I played with fanboy blinders on, the longer the game progressed, regressed, and revealed its true self, the less and less I enjoyed of it. I wish I could say 2042 is now in an extremely solid spot, and while in many ways it's much better than it was, I was disappointed with almost every new map and game mode and season that was added, and the fact that they were so far and few between, even now at the end of its life cycle, makes 2042 feel like a half-baked mess, still to me. There were map reworks that did the bare minimum, recycling of old events and content, and lazily slapped together weapons imported from Portal, and it's still just not enough good content to keep my interest. The gunplay is fine, it's smooth, but character movement still feels extremely floaty to me, and overall the game just has a very cheap and arcadey feel that is really hard for me to articulate, but I just can't shake it. 2042 in many ways can be a very fun, mindless arcadey shooter, but still fails completely to capture the magic of the series, and honestly I recommend playing Battlefield 4, 1, or 5 over it even now. That being said, it's probably worth about $10 to jump in and enjoy some chaotic gameplay. And that's it. While technically older hosted servers exist of past games, like Bad Company 2 at this point and Battlefield 2, and I believe fan-managed games like Project Reality are still alive and well, if you wanted to experience an older title than Battlefield 3, then you probably were already doing it and didn't need to watch this video. For those that may have found this video informative or entertaining, I'm glad you enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content, and let me know your thoughts below on which Battlefield others should play in 2024. Until next time.